In the bustling halls of Boston's prestigious Turner Medical Center, 85-year-old James Wilson quietly mops the floors, enduring daily taunts from young medical residents who mock his trembling hands and slow pace. "Hey, Gramps, you missed a spot!" They laugh, never noticing the surgical precision with which he cleans every surface. But when a critical emergency forces the hospital into lockdown and the power fails, these same arrogant young doctors are stunned to discover that the old janitor they've been ridiculing is actually Dr. James Wilson, once the nation's leading neurosurgeon who performed over 10,000 life-saving operations before losing everything to care for his ill wife. As chaos erupts in the hospital, they'll learn that the man they thought was just pushing a mop might be their only hope to save a young patient's life. Like and subscribe to follow this powerful story about how quick judgments and casual cruelty can blind us to the giants walking among us, and how true greatness often hides behind the most humble facades. James Wilson started each workday at 4 a.m. before most doctors had even gone to sleep. His hands, though not as steady as when they held a scalpel, still moved with careful precision as he mixed cleaning solutions to exactly the right concentrations. "A sterile environment saves as many lives as a skilled surgeon," he would mutter to himself, a lesson he'd taught countless residents during his 30 years in the operating room. Now, he taught it only to empty hallways and his mop bucket. The morning group of residents usually arrived around 6, fresh-faced and full of the arrogance that came with their new white coats. Dr. Sarah Chen, their ringleader, particularly enjoyed pointing out spots James had missed. "If you can't do the job properly, maybe it's time to retire," she'd say, smirking at her colleagues. "There's a reason we don't let surgeons operate at your age." The irony of her words would have made James laugh if they didn't hurt so much. He'd performed his last surgery at 75, hands still steady enough to clip an aneurysm in half the time it took surgeons half his age. But that was before Helen got sick, before the medical bill stripped away everything they'd saved. This morning, James was cleaning near the neurosurgery department when he overheard Dr. Chen discussing a difficult case. 17-year-old male, inoperable brain stem tumor, she was telling her colleagues. Dr. Matthews says the positioning makes it impossible to reach without damaging vital structures. James paused in his mopping. He'd pioneered an approach for exactly this type of tumor back in '82. Published a paper that changed the field. But now... "Hey, Grandpa," Dr. Chen called out. "Are you eavesdropping on private medical discussions? Stick to what you know. There's a spill in the cafeteria that needs your expertise." The other residents laughed, but one of them, Dr. Michael Torres, looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, that's not necessary." "What? He's just a janitor. It's not like he understands what we're talking about anyway." James quietly pushed his mop bucket toward the cafeteria, Chen's words echoing in his ears. Just a janitor. If she only knew how many cases like hers he'd solved, how many impossible tumors he'd removed, how many families he'd given hope when everyone else had given up. In the cafeteria, he found the spill, coffee someone had knocked over and left. As he cleaned, his mind wandered to Helen. She would have hated seeing him like this, would have insisted he tell them who he really was. But he'd made her a promise. "Just focus on getting better," he'd told her, selling their house to pay for her treatments. "Nothing else matters." She died anyway, leaving him with nothing but memories and mounting debts. Taking this job had been his way of staying close to medicine, of still contributing in some small way to patient care. A commotion at the entrance caught his attention. EMTs were rushing in with a trauma case. Young man, head injury from a motorcycle accident. James recognized the signs of increasing intracranial pressure even from across the room. Dr. Chen and her residents rushed to attend the patient. James watched as they debated treatment options, Knowing they were missing critical symptoms, the boy's left pupil was sluggish in a way that suggested, but he was just a janitor. What did he know? Thunder crashed outside as a spring storm rolled in. The hospital lights flickered ominously. "Someone page Dr. Matthews," Chen ordered. "We need a neurosurgeon here now." But James knew Dr. Matthews was at a conference in Chicago. He'd overheard the discussion yesterday while cleaning the doctor's lounge, and the backup neurosurgeon was out sick with flu. The lights flickered again, and this time they stayed off. The emergency generators should have kicked in immediately, but something was wrong. In the darkness, James heard the patient's breathing pattern change. He knew what was coming next, had seen it hundreds of times. Without immediate intervention, the boy would be dead in minutes. "Where's the backup power?" Chen was shouting. "We need lights, we need—" "Get me a pen light," James said quietly, already moving toward the patient, "and a sterile instrument kit." Dr. Chen turned toward James's voice in the darkness. "What are you doing? Get back! This is a medical emergency. This boy has a rapidly expanding subdural hematoma," James said calmly, his old surgeon's voice returning naturally. His left pupil's sluggish response and the deteriorating breathing pattern suggest the bleed is compressing his brainstem. Without immediate intervention, he has perhaps 3 minutes before permanent damage, 4 before death. The authority in his voice made everyone freeze. Dr. Torres shone his phone's flashlight on James, who had already removed his janitor's jacket to reveal perfectly pressed shirt sleeves beneath. "How do you—" Chen started, but James cut her off. "There's no time for explanations. Right now, you have 2 choices. You can either continue questioning the janitor, or you can help me save this boy's life." Something in his tone made Chen hand over her penlight without further argument. In the dim light, James's hands moved with practiced precision, examining the patient's skull. "The impact point suggests the bleeding is here," he said, fingers gently probing. "We need to relieve the pressure immediately. Do you have a cranial drill kit in the trauma bay?" Torres nodded, rushing to get it. Chen watched in stunned silence as James began arranging instruments with the same methodical care he used with his cleaning supplies. "You're not really a janitor, are you?" she whispered. "Right now, I'm whatever this boy needs me to be," James replied, accepting the drill kit from Torres. "Now, I need steady hands and strong lights. Can you help? Or should I find someone else?" Chen and Torres held their phone lights as James worked. His hands, which had trembled while mopping floors that morning, were now rock steady. He spoke as he operated, his voice calm and instructive. "See how the membrane's discolored here? Classic sign of acute bleeding. Watch the angle of entry. Too steep and you nick the venous sinus, too shallow and you won't drain effectively." Other staff members gathered around, holding more lights. In the darkness, with only phone lights illuminating his work, James performed a procedure he could have done blindfolded. Minutes that felt like hours passed. Finally, the pressure released. The boy's breathing stabilized. James placed the final sutures with textbook precision. "He'll need proper imaging when the power's back," he said, stepping back, "but he'll live." As if on cue, the emergency generators finally kicked in. Light flooded the trauma bay, illuminating the scene, the saved patient, the astonished staff, and James standing there in his janitor's uniform with surgical gloves still on his hands. Dr. Matthews, who had apparently made it back from Chicago early, came running in. He stopped short at the sight. "My God," he breathed. "James Wilson!" The James Wilson. Chen looked confused. "Who?" "The pioneer of modern neurosurgery," Matthews said in awe. "His technique for brainstem tumors is still the gold standard. We were just discussing his approach at the conference." He turned to James. "But what are you doing here? Working as a janitor?" James finished, already removing his gloves. It's a long story, one that perhaps Dr. Chen would like to hear since she has a patient with an inoperable brainstem tumor. In Dr. Matthews' office, James finally shared his story. Chen and Torres sat listening, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame and fascination. Helen got sick in 2018, he explained quietly. Rare form of cancer. The experimental treatments weren't covered by insurance. We sold everything. The house, my medical practice, our savings. Even my surgical awards were auctioned off. He showed them a worn photo of his wife he kept in his wallet. She was everything to me, supported me through medical school, through my residency, through every late night and missed anniversary when I was building my career. When she needed me, there was no choice to make. Dr. Matthews shook his head. But why didn't you reach out? The medical community would have... Would have what? James interrupted gently. Helen was dying. I couldn't spend what little time we had left fighting hospital boards and insurance companies. She needed her husband, not a fundraising campaign. Chen, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. But after she passed, why stay as a janitor? Any hospital would hire you as a consultant, a teacher. Because I made her a promise, James said, his voice thick with emotion. The night before she died, Helen made me promise not to let her illness make me bitter, to find a way to keep helping people, even if it wasn't in an operating room. He gestured around the hospital. As a janitor, I still save lives. Every surface I clean, every floor I sterilize, that prevents infections, protects patients. It's not as glamorous as brain surgery, but it matters. Torres leaned forward. The way you handled that emergency today, those skills, that knowledge, you can't let that go to waste. James smiled sadly. Knowledge never goes to waste, son. I've watched you all, seen your struggles and successes. Sometimes I leave journal articles where you'll find them, or adjust equipment settings when I notice they're slightly off. Chen's eyes widened. The mystery articles about my brainstem tumor case, the ones that kept appearing on my desk, that was you. You're a good surgeon, Doctor. Chen, James said kindly, but you let your pride blind you. The same pride that made you mock an old janitor is the pride that's keeping you from seeing the solution to your patient's tumor. He picked up a pen and began sketching on a notepad. The approach you're considering is too direct, but if you come in from here... His hands moved with the same precision they'd shown in the trauma bay. This was the technique I developed in '82. Everyone said it was impossible until I proved it wasn't. Chen watched, transfixed, as the solution she'd been searching for appeared on the paper. This could work. This could actually work. Of course it will work, Matthews said. It's the Wilson approach. We still teach it in residency, or we would if residents bothered to study their history. Chen looked at James with tears in her eyes. All this time, I was so cruel to you, and you were still trying to help me save my patient. That's what doctors do, James replied simply. We help people. Whether we're wearing surgical scrubs or pushing a mop bucket, the oath we took doesn't change. News of James's emergency surgery spread through the hospital like wildfire. Staff members who had walked past him for months without a glance now stopped to listen to his quiet wisdom. Residents who had mocked him began seeking his advice. But it was Chen who underwent the most profound transformation. She had spent every free moment with James, learning not just about neurosurgery, but about humility and compassion. I've been thinking about what you said, she told him one morning, as he methodically cleaned the operating room where she would later attempt the Wilson approach on her young patient. About pride blinding us. I didn't just mock you. I mocked every patient's family member, every hospital worker I thought was beneath me. James continued his careful cleaning routine as he replied, Pride is a surgeon's greatest enemy. Not because it makes us cruel, though it often does, but because it makes us stop learning. The moment we think we know everything is the moment we stop growing. He paused, checking the cleaning solution's concentration. You know why I'm so particular about this? Because 30 years ago I lost a patient to a post-op infection. I was the best neurosurgeon in the country, but I couldn't save her from bacteria because someone hadn't cleaned properly. Every life matters, Dr. Chen. Every role matters. The young surgeon watched as he worked, seeing for the first time the surgical precision in his cleaning technique. Will you be there today for the surgery? James smiled gently. I'll be there. Just like I've been there for every surgery in this room for the past 3 years. Watching, cleaning, caring. When it was time for the operation, Chen stood at the table, trying to steady her nerves. The Wilson approach was complex, and her patient's family had placed all their hope in her. As she looked around the operating room, she saw James in the corner, mop in hand, watching quietly. He gave her a small nod, and somehow, that was all she needed. The surgery was successful. As the team celebrated, Chen noticed James slipping out quietly to continue his rounds. She followed him. We did it, she said, catching up to him. The tumor's gone. That family has their son back because of you. No, James corrected softly. They have him back because of you. You did the surgery. I just showed you the way. Dr. Wilson, she began, but he held up his hand. James, he said, just James. I'm still a janitor, Dr. Chen, and proud to be one. But you could be so much more. The hospital board wants to offer you a position, teaching, consulting. James stopped pushing his mop bucket and turned to face her. Do you know what I see every day? I see families getting the worst news of their lives. I see people facing their mortality. And yes, I see young doctors letting power go to their heads. This job, this simple, humble job, lets me help all of them in ways I never could in an operating room. He gestured to his cleaning cart. Every surface I clean might save a life. Every floor I mop might prevent an infection. And every now and then, I get to remind a brilliant young surgeon that true greatness isn't about status or titles. It's about serving others, however we can. 1 year later, Turner Medical Center looked very different. A new sign hung in the main lobby, the Wilson Center for Medical Education, but James had refused to let them use his photo. Instead, the wall displayed images of all hospital workers, doctors, nurses, janitors, cafeteria staff, with the caption, "Every role saves lives." James still worked as a janitor, still started his days at 4 a.m. But now residents would often join him on his rounds, learning about patient care from a perspective they'd never considered before. Medicine isn't just about procedures and prescriptions, he would tell them as he demonstrated the proper way to sterilize a room. It's about creating an environment of healing. Everyone from the heart surgeon to the person serving food plays a part in that. Chen had transformed her practice based on his teachings. She'd started a revolutionary program where new residents spent their first week working alongside support staff, cleaning rooms, serving food, transporting patients. You can't truly care for patients until you understand every aspect of their care, she would explain, echoing James's words. On the anniversary of that emergency surgery in the darkness, the hospital organized a special ceremony. Families of patients saved by the Wilson approach gathered to share their stories. But the most powerful moment came from an unexpected source. A young janitor stepped forward, someone James had trained. Last month, I noticed a pattern in how a patient was holding his coffee cup during my morning cleaning. The tremor didn't look right to me, because Mr. Wilson taught us to really see patients, not just clean around them. I mentioned it to the nurses. They found an early brain tumor. That patient is alive because a janitor was paying attention. James sat quietly in the back, tears in his eyes. Helen would have loved this. he thought. She would have seen that her last wish, for him to keep helping people, had created something far more powerful than he could have achieved in an operating room. After the ceremony, Chen found him already back at work, carefully mopping the hallway. "You're not going to the reception?" she asked. "Floors don't clean themselves, Doctor." "Chen," he smiled. "Besides, I think I'm making a bigger statement here than I could at any reception." She nodded, understanding finally what he'd been teaching them all along. That true dignity isn't in what we do, but in how we do it. "Exactly," James replied, continuing his methodical cleaning. "Every morning, I make these floors shine like mirrors. Know why? Because somewhere today, a worried family is walking these halls, heading to see someone they love. They're scared, uncertain. But when they see these gleaming floors, smell the cleanness, it gives them confidence, makes them feel their loved one is in good hands." He straightened up, looking at his reflection in the polished floor. "I was a great neurosurgeon. Now I'm a great janitor. Both matter. Both save lives." Chen watched him work for a moment longer, then picked up a mop herself. As they cleaned together, the renowned surgeon and the humble janitor who had taught her the true meaning of medicine, she realized that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, and somewhere, she was sure, Helen was smiling. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that true heroes often wear the humblest uniforms, hit like and subscribe for more powerful stories of unsung heroes walking among us. Click the video recommendation appearing on your screen now to discover another emotional journey that will change how you see the world around you.